For some, there is an invisible barrier to professional advancement, an unspoken limit that you have to place on your ambitions. I've been working for years paranoid about this looming threat, and I'm not the only one. Despite several years of reckoning and a historic push for diversity, equity, and inclusion, is there another terrifying barrier to success? And is it targeting Black folks hired into positions of leadership?
That job was, on paper, the dream job.
And it's not about whether I can do the job, it's the intention of the hire.
I believe that there's dissonance between why I was hired and who I am as a leader.
I'm thinking about the possibilities and limits of representational politics because I need to know, are institutions and corporations actually ready for change, or are Black leaders simply being set up to fail? I'm Amanda Paris, and I'm balancing on the edge of the glass cliff for the culture.
There's something about sitting in a room with people that I don't know, having a shared experience in which we're witnessing, somebody tell the truth. It can only happen in the theater. And it's part of why live performance is something that people still flock to.
Meet Nataki Garrett. She landed the prestigious role of Artistic Director of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival back in 2019. I'm in the small city of Ashland to talk to her about what it's been like to be the first African American to take the reins of this organization.
There was a long history of correspondence between the artistic leader and some of the patrons. And there's a local, community here who feel like they have ownership over the organization. So, they'll write you the letters and tell you what they think, and letters where people wanted to help, by letting me know that I may not understand where I am or what this is. And then there was somebody who kept sending me these cards, and the content of the card would be using anti-racist language, but there would be Klan stickers all over it.
What?
Yeah.
Let's pause. I've jumped right in, and I think we need to rewind a bit. Let me tell you a little about the Tony Award-winning Oregon Shakespeare Festival, aka OSF. With over 8 decades under its belt, OSF is one of the oldest and largest professional regional repertory theaters in the U.S. The tourism that the festival brings to Ashland fills its restaurants, hotels, and shops, making it one of the economic engines of this valley. Can you talk me through making the decision to come here and take this position?
The Oregon Shakespeare Festival at the time was a $44 million organization. And so what it means fiscally is that you're at the king's seat, basically, of, sort of theater dominance. That platform and access alone, the ability to commission writers, directors, and actors, and designers. The space itself, it has so much promise. There's so much possibility. But I was like, there's no way that this industry is going to give me that king's seat. I imagine they would go through any number of
other firsts.
You know what I mean? Before they got to a Black woman.
Right.
But I was like, there's no way I'm going to get that job. And then
you got it.
And then I got the job.
And then you got it.
We produced 8 onstage plays from classics to musicals to new works, and continue to break new ground on the O Digital stage.
When Nataki Garrett was announced as the new artistic director of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, she had big ideas about how the theater could thrive in an industry struggling to connect with the younger generation.
I'm so glad you're here. You do?
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Do you want to work on the stage, or do you want to work on film?
Work on the stage.
You should do all of it. Work on stage, work on film, be a producer, produce your own work, write it. Yeah? I came to OSF at a time when new plays and new play development was at the center of the work, and I came here because of that. So it was really an exciting time to come to OSF.
I've also heard you speak a little bit about the need to diversify the kind of audience that is coming to the theater and think about the invitation to that audience.
I believe that's why the board of directors hired me, is because the American theater has to shift in this way.
Nataki's hire made history and headlines and was even trending on social media. But getting this position in a place like Oregon, historically known as a whites-only state, I wondered, was she handed an impossible task? So, did you have any reservations?
I had a lot of reservations.
Okay.
I never trust the parade. Most people who are celebrating never met me. And then there's the fanfare is over. You know, whatever they're celebrating will begin to recede, and the truth about who you are as an artist and a leader will emerge, and that's what you're really here for.
Nataki was being presented with the opportunity of a lifetime. But let's be real. I can understand why she didn't want to get caught up in the hype. It's one thing to break through the glass ceiling, but would she be able to overcome the resistance that can follow such hires? In 2005, Michelle Ryan and Alex Haslam, two professors, wrote about the glass cliff theory. It's the idea that women and racialized people are only offered positions of leadership when that position is risky, precarious, and there is a higher chance of failure. Leaders don't get the resources, tools, support, and transparency needed to succeed. When I first read about it, I was stunned because it articulated a phenomenon I've seen play out so many times. Let's consider the case of Tamara Thermitis. A distinguished lawyer, she went from a high-level nomination to filing lawsuits still being fought today. Here's how her story unfolds. Over several decades, Tamara built a reputation in the province of Quebec as a leader in the fight against systemic discrimination and was celebrated for her work, including the key role she played on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
I want to acknowledge the tremendous work of Tamara. With respect to the settlement, the historic Indian residential school settlement, Tamara was just outstanding.
Tamara chaired countless committees, received numerous awards for her work. So it wasn't too much of a surprise when in the fall of 2016, she was tapped to lead the Quebec Human Rights Commission, making history as the first racialized person in the position.
For me, being the first, it's always a double-edged sword. You know, indeed, we have to pave the way. And I was happy to see people celebrating, but the fact is that celebration is not enough. You know, the celebratory can be like very window dressing.
Tamara had never overseen anything as big as the Quebec Human Rights Commission, with its staff of about 150 and an annual budget just under $15 million. The commission is responsible for enforcing employment equity laws and investigating racial profiling complaints. But it had recently been under fire in the media for the lack of diversity within its own senior ranks. Although Tamara hadn't sought out the position, she says she immediately saw the potential to make a difference. So what was the dream and the vision that you had when you stepped into the Quebec Human Rights Commission?
So I entered into that space with the idea that I had a nomination that came from Parliament, which is supposed to be like a kind of a guarantee that you can move things along. When they offered me the job, I said, wow, what an interesting proposal that they bring to me so I can enter and change things. So for me, that job was on paper. And I think it's nice to underline on paper, the dream job.
When Tamara started at the commission, she felt she was entering what she describes as an institution riddled with issues.
You know, I didn't have the information, and that's the way also that you starve people from information, so people are not able to make decisions. So I had like general information. There was no historical record. So I had like no real tool, but I see that things were not working.
Later, an independent investigation commissioned by the Minister of Justice would confirm that the Quebec Human Rights Commission was in disarray, with high leadership turnover and poor hiring and promotion practices. It echoed many of Tamara's findings.
A week after I entered, I look at the books. I look at who was hired and what were the positions. So I became somebody that was very threatening because I was looking into things. So when you look into things and when you're asking questions and you are in a white space, you are the first. You're supposed to play the game. And you're not playing the game because that's not your game.
So how did you realize that all of these things that you were doing were being perceived as threats? Like, did you know in the moment that people were not welcoming this?
No, I realized when I received complaints, but I did not realize it before.
Barely 5 months into the job, Tamara found out about anonymous complaints that would shift the course of her career. Maybe the idea of making history is more seductive than the reality. If you want an example of someone who's broken the glass ceiling, look no further than Wes Hall. He's a power broker and one of the dragons on the popular series Dragon's Den, who's worked his way up from poverty in Jamaica to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions on Bay Street. And he does it all in the snazziest suits you've ever seen.
Hall is a major player on Bay Street. Maclean's magazine listed him at number 16 on the 2021 Power List, a ranking of the 50 most influential Canadians.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Great.
Likewise. Well, thank you. Please, come this way.
Wes Hall climbed the highest heights of the corporate world. But in 2020, the world stopped. And then George Floyd was brutally murdered. The video of his death became a lightning rod. There were global protests. Leaders resigned and were fired. Hard conversations were demanded. And in the midst of it all, many politicians in the US, Canada, and the UK were determined to hold tight to the status quo.
Some African American community leaders, and a lot of others actually, have said it's systemic. Where do you stand on that?
I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I think the police do an incredible job.
Thank God that we're different than the United States. And we don't have the systemic, deep roots they have had for years.
Do you think that this country is racist?
I don't. I think we're one of the most tolerant and open societies in the world.
But these politicians didn't speak for many Black people, including Wes Hall. He felt compelled to do something that went beyond his own success story.
I was profoundly affected by it, and I wrote something about it. It was published in the Globe and Mail in the front page, and all these business leaders calling me saying, Wes, I didn't know you were going through this thing. I didn't know you were experiencing these things as a Black person. And ultimately I said to them, yes, we are. And I believe that you can do something about it. So if you look around your boardroom table and you see no Black representation there, ask yourself why. Is there a systemic reason for it? And the systemic reason could be that I only recruit board members that were former CEOs. That's a systemic problem, because if you look at former CEOs in this country, especially a publicly traded company, that were Black, there will be 0 on that list. And so we go, let's look at all the barriers, the artificial barriers that exist in our company, and then remove them. And then intentionally go out there and find people to promote, to get into the C-suite, or to bring them into the organization.
Wes created the Black North Initiative to help break the glass ceiling and get the country's top corporations to publicly commit to addressing the gaps created by systemic racism. It was part of a sea change sparked in 2020 as a number of doors rapidly began to open across industries. Suddenly, Black people were being hired in positions of leadership. As monumental as this all was, it also triggered some to question its timing. Meet Gayleen Gould. With almost 3 decades in London's cultural sector, Gayleen left right before the world stopped.
In 2019, nobody really got in touch with me or reached out, from the sector.
Right.
I remember reaching out to quite a leading recruitment agent, and they weren't particularly very interested.
Really? After all your experience and all your... Wow.
Until...
Oh my God,
Probably, yes. I kid you not, it had to be March a 20. Week or, a couple of weeks after George Floyd's murder. I probably had about 20, 30 offers. This is the reality of the situation. All these years we've been told we don't know people in these positions to hire them, and yet all of y'all had my details all that time.
Gayleen was a programmer and manager at some of the world's leading cultural institutions, including the British Film Institute, Arts Council England, and the Toronto International Film Festival. She was even appointed a cultural ambassador for the City of London. Recently, she's made the decision to leave it all behind.
Part of why we gathered is because, I sort of call us a bit the only ones. A lot of people who work in the cultural sector, often you're the only person of colour in your organisation. Or, especially, when you start getting into senior positions, it becomes even less. And that has an effect on the body. This is why we're doing this day. When George Floyd murder happened, my phone blew up also from leaders of colour who were just absolutely dealing with deep wells of grief, rage, and then suddenly the organisation woken up to their presence, and suddenly they were being pushed on the front line to try and fix these deep-seated problems. I think so many hires took place post-2020 very quickly.
Yes.
It's interesting because I think in the junior positions it was probably much more honest, right? There's a sense that you got these skills, you can do the job, sure. But I think the more influential positions, there is more danger that I've experienced, that I'm less clear of the intention of my hire.
Right, yeah.
And it's not about whether I can do the job, it's the intention of the hire.
I often question the intentions of the opportunities I get, so Gayleen's words hit home. I'm curious about some of the other patterns she's observed when trying to navigate these institutions. I imagine that you would start your position with one kind of energy and feeling about it, but then that might change and shift. So can you walk me through that?
So there is always this great excitement because, one, you've worked hard to get them, and you're at that point you're at your most idealistic. You have all the dreams of what can happen, but then once you start doing your job, people around you are like,
oh wait, you actually want to change things?
Exactly. You're asking us difficult questions,
right?
And so all of the love that you had this little bubble of begins to dissipate and is left, you're quite barren around you. Personally, I'm a creative. I'm not a diversity and inclusion person. I don't know that stuff.
But because of who you are being tasked with doing this diversity, equity, inclusion work.
Unfortunately, you have to do it in a lot of, legacy heritage organisations in order to get to the creative bit. And so then my job becomes a massive educational piece of work before I even get to do the job.
So you have to do all this other labour in order to just start implementing the vision before you get to it.
That's it. And that's not just your team, that's everybody within the organisation.
That sounds exhausting.
And that is exhausting. Yeah. And that, I think, is what leads to the glass cliff, is the burnout then comes.
Right. Many companies may have been panic hiring for optics in 2020, but Wes Hall was hoping to plant seeds for more meaningful change. His Black North Initiative created a pledge to fight systemic racism, and the CEOs of 500 Canadian companies signed it. Among the various commitments of the pledge was a goal to have 3.5% of executive and board roles in Canada held by Black leaders by 2025.
We often hear this expression, representation matters. It does. Because now all of a sudden, you young folks coming up that are so capable recognize the fact that at least in one company, there are no barriers to your success.
2020 was a very particular year in terms of the energy and what felt like this huge wave of solidarity. Did you believe these companies were truly committed to make these changes?
I spoke to practically every single CEO that signed that pledge. Like you and I are having a conversation right now. It took a while because I had to convince these folks as to why this is important and why they should do it. And so the opinion that I formed with most of the people that I spoke with were that they wanted to see genuine change.
The Black North Initiative was a huge undertaking, but its impact is hard to measure. A few years after its launch, news reports challenged whether it was actually making the progress it promised. So you've had all of these conversations, you've done all this labor, you're having all of these moments of connection as well with all of these people. It feels genuine. A few years later, there are some reports that it feels like maybe the results were not what we thought they were going to be. Can you talk a little bit about where we are right now with these results?
Yeah, so we signed the pledge in 2020, and in 2.5 years, people go, the problem should be solved now. But one of the things that's important for companies to do is not to steal black talent from other companies, because you're just recycling the same pool.
People.
It's to build your pipeline. It's to look into your company and start promoting people up. So it's going to take some time to do that.
In the midst of his success and larger-than-life persona, it can be easy to forget that Wes is often the one and only black person in many of the rooms he is in. And as we spoke, and I heard how fiercely he defended the Black North Initiative, I began to wonder about the impact being a first and only has on him. I'm curious about being in these spaces where there's not a lot of people that look like you, come from the same story that you come from. Did you ever feel a sense of like isolation and loneliness while navigating this route?
If you don't, you're not human. Because if you walk into a room and you're the only one that look like you in that room, everybody's going to look to you and go, okay, why are you here? In fact, I remember somebody actually say it out loud. They thought they were using their inside voice, but they actually, why is he here?
Wow.
And then turned out that somebody said, well, he runs Kingsdale. And it was the CEO that asked the question. And he's actually here to just save your bacon. He didn't think I was a Bay Street guy. He thought I was an entertainer. He thought I was an athlete. So, being the only person in a room, it's a lonely experience. And over the years, it has its toll, because I would love to see others like me.
Perfect. C'est parfait.
Okay.
And then when you come back up here, you flatten out here.
Got it.
So when you come back up here, you really kind of want to go like, what?
2020 was a hard year for many of us. But for Nataki Garrett, who had just stepped into her position as the first African-American artistic director of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, it was a year that pushed her in ways she could never have foreseen. Can you walk us through some of the challenges and roadblocks that you have had to deal with that kind of came up in 2020?
We opened on March 6th, 2020, and closed on March 12th, 2020. And then over the course of those next 6 weeks, we laid off 483 people.
It's heartbreaking.
Devastating. Yeah. It was I'd just gotten here. I'm supposed to learn about OSF and the community and these artists and the company, the acting company. I was supposed to learn about all of that in that first year.
And then in the midst of all of that, you had a baby.
Yes. My daughter came in October of 2020, and I didn't get to sort of lavish in nesting and motherhood. I spent the next year fundraising, trying to bring in enough money to make sure that the place didn't sunset. Every day I was steeped in fear that the organization would fail. I was mostly just trying not to fail.
As if a pandemic and a pregnancy weren't enough, Nataki says she felt that internally there was a lack of understanding of how things would have to change within OSF. What happened when you actually started to do the work?
So the team here, really great set of people. I remember saying, so we have to make sure that we have to be, focused on different ways of fundraising, because, you have to deal with the fact that, a lot of people that you have created these relationships with have never ever written a check for an organization that has a black woman at the helm.
And might not want to start today.
And they may not realize until they're in the middle of writing it and they don't know it's their bias. They don't know bias is the water, not the shark. Society has said to them, somehow giving this to OSF with a black woman, may not be the same as what it was. They don't know why it feels weird. They just know that it does, right? And that team. Later I was told that some of them actually said, to each other, it's too bad that she doesn't feel confident. We have to help her feel confident. And I was like, I feel confident.
It's not about the confidence. It's about the insight.
I know how to raise white dollars with a black face, because I've only ever had this face.
Right. It's like now we just have to change the ways. But that openness was not necessarily there.
I just don't think they could perceive it.
Right.
And a lot of people do not take responsibility for how bias plays a role, because they think you're either racist or you're not. I know that all the practices within an organization will shift because the way in which our country is structured, people are twice as likely to assume that I am a bad operator. And so every single part of the business operations has to actually be functioning at the top shape.
While grappling with this resistance, Nataki also realized that OSF had some hefty financial baggage as a result of decisions that occurred long before her tenure.
Almost every one of my contemporaries who received their appointments within a year or two of mine, almost all of us inherited theaters with huge deficits, catastrophic deficits. And inheriting an organization with a structural deficit is automatically a glass cliff. So if you inherit a theater with a deficit, a structural deficit, the first thing you have to do is go back to see how we got here. And my experience here is that it's hard to find out.
What was that? Is that just like a lack of transparency? Was it?
I think it's, if you've never had to be transparent in that way, you don't even know that you're not being transparent. But here's the funny thing is, I can't get away with 97% of what any of my white male predecessors got away with. My anger is not perceived in the same way. My directives are taken as suggestive. And so something changes when you bring your black female self into those spaces. And automatically, that structural deficit that was fine for years becomes a big problem that you are now at the center of.
We've been talking a lot about 2020, but I want to be clear. These patterns have been happening long before the term glass cliff was coined. I'm in LA to talk with a Hollywood legend who has seen it all. Larry Wilmore is a comedian, writer, and producer behind a lot of my favorite shows. As the creator and showrunner of The Bernie Mac Show, Larry Wilmore was pushing the limits of what a sitcom could be. Receiving all of the accolades, so many awards, so many nominations. And I'm curious about what your relationship has been like to that kind of validation from institutions. Like, is that important to you at all?
Absolutely. Because most of them are peers, you know, people who do the same thing. When I was doing the Bernie Mac Show, I heard from so many writers at the time who would call me or send me notes and say, Larry, and writers rarely do this. Writers could be kind of, you know, competitive and that kind of stuff, you know. But they would say, oh, my God, our show watched your show, you know, the show they were working on. We watched your show last week. It was so good, you know, because we were doing so many different things on TV at that time. And that made me feel so great, you know. So the fight I was having with the executives was a completely different world, you know.
Right. The Bernie Mac Show got rave reviews. For his out-of-the-box thinking, Larry became the first Black writer to win the Emmy for Outstanding Writing of a Comedy Series. And yet, Larry says the network kept pushing against his vision. Was it creative differences or something more?
And I just realized they just didn't understand what I was doing. But
Did you understand in the moment that they didn't understand, or was that something you came to later?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No, I knew very early on it was apparent, you know. But I knew I was disrupting because I was doing something that wasn't done. So, you know, years later, it was done. But at that time, nobody was doing shows like that.
You're making all of these amazing creative discoveries.
Right.
And you're getting these notes back that are not
it was
realizing that you're making these incredible discoveries and are not on this incredible creative journey with you. How do you navigate
And in fact,
that?
it's the opposite. They think I'm incompetent.
Right.
They think it wasn't neutral.
Yeah.
They thought I was incompetent, and that's very important to realize, you know. That's the part that's racial, by the way.
You're getting all of this pushback in this way, and are you reading it in that way? Are you
1,000%.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You're realizing that this is racial.
I didn't need anything from them.
Yeah.
You know, I figured this shit out on my own. You guys should just get back in the back of the car and just let me drive and be happy that you're getting to this place that we're going, you know.
And then how are you, like, emotionally navigating that? Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
that was tough. Yeah. That's different.
Okay.
Intellectually is one thing. My marriage was really tough at that time, and, you know, Bernie kind of turned against me at one point, which was tough. I was at my emotional low point, emotionally and psychologically, especially by the end of it when I got fired. It was really, really low point. So that was one of the toughest times of my life.
Fox moved the Bernie Mac Show's time slot in its second season, pitting it against one of the only other Black sitcoms on TV at the time. It was a move many said led to a dip in the ratings. Soon after, Fox declined to renew Larry's contract, and he left the series he created.
At the time, I was devastated.
Yeah.
You know, this was the thing you had worked so hard on, and you thought it was great, but other people didn't value it and thought you were bad. You know, I'm a human being. I didn't know if I was going to work again. You know, I didn't know what was going to happen. You know, so I was devastated, honestly.
As I think about all of the battles Larry, Nataki, and Tamara have had to fight, I hear an internal voice questioning why we stay. Why do we keep pushing for space within these institutions and industries that so rarely open the door and interrogate our presence once we're inside? I asked Gayleen this question, and her response surprised me.
Often I was staying in situations that were not healthy for me because I felt that possibly that's what I deserved, that I'm used to struggle, and that I have to work 3 times as hard.
I don't know why I'm feeling so personal about this, but yeah, feels like you're really speaking to me.
I think so. I think that's the undoing I'm doing. It's not just my undoing, it's generational undoing. And there's reasons why that my ancestors had to have that. But do I? Do I? And what might I have to let go of? What might I have to put down? This idea of Black excellence and perfection. So there's something about understanding how much of my identity has been framed through, let's just say it, a mammification of what I, as a Black woman, think my role is. And that's something that I struggle with managing.
Oof. I feel like I want to go like, okay, just drop. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to be thinking about what Gayleen just said for a long time. When Tamara Thermatis accepted her appointment as the president of the Quebec Human Rights Commission, she started asking questions and interrogating old practices. But within months, Tamara was accused of bullying and harassment and became the subject of an investigation by the Quebec Ombudsman's Office that was then leaked to the press. After only a year and a half in the role, Tamara was out.
I was forced to resign, and my reputation was destroyed. The inquiry was in the newspaper while it was going on. And normally, inquiries are supposed to be private. So, but you know, the media can be used to destroy people. So I realized that it was too late. And you know, I had a job. It's not as if I was looking for something.
They came to you.
They came to me.
At the time, the interim president of the Quebec Human Rights Commission stated that while he doesn't have the same take of the case as Tamara, the change and in-depth reflection she's calling for is what they're working on.
At one point, you know, I was not able to go to the restaurant because my face was in the newspaper. I didn't want to have the backlash of the news. Yeah. So I didn't want to be seen. In my case, it's like a social murder. And the end game can be like people with depression, losing their job, losing their sanity.
So this is all the material, ramifications of this social death that you're talking about.
The social death.
Yeah. There is a very real risk in accepting these public positions of leadership, and that risk isn't limited to reputation. Remember those postcards Nataki Garrett said she got soon after she started as the artistic director of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival? The ones with the KKK stickers? She said that was just one of several threats she received.
If anything, I think for me, I really doubled down on my values. If this comes with a threat, then I must be disrupting something that needs to be disrupted.
But the thing is, that threat didn't happen just anywhere. It happened in Ashland, Oregon. In the midst of beautiful mountains and picturesque views is a history of a place where city signs and ordinances made it clear that non-whites, particularly African Americans, were not welcome to live there. My crew and I got a taste of this history within the first minutes of our arrival in Ashland. So we arrived at the airport. We came out of the airport, and a young woman of color, I'm not exactly sure where she's from, came up to us and was like, are you from here? And we said no. And she's like, so why are you here? I was like, oh, well, to go to the festival. She's like, oh, okay, just be careful,
Hi.
Yeah.
Be careful.
Be careful. She's like, this place isn't always very friendly to people like us, people of color.
Her warning is actually meant to be care, right? But it's also a way of letting you know whether or not you should feel welcomed here.
I'm curious about how your relationship to Ashland has changed.
I know about Ashland. I know about Oregon. Oregon is the one state that had these exclusion laws that were baked into the constitution of the state. I do a lot of research about an area before I moved there. And one of the ways in which I understand what my experience might be like is how they deal with their Native and Indigenous population. And there's a whole road, one of the largest in the county, that is named Dead Indian Memorial Road.
Oh my God.
And I think the memorial was added later. And so some of the locals still call it the original name. And so if the narrative around what happens to Native people is deeply negative, then I can usually gauge what my experience is going to be like. Because there's some way in which Native and African American experience run in tandem.
The growing reaction against Nataki was so strong that the OSF Board of Directors released this statement condemning the racist and sexist backlash, as well as the barrage of harassing local press coverage. Even after the pandemic, the structural deficit, the resistance to change, and the threatening letters, Nataki was determined to stick it out. That is, until a new threat came that was deemed so serious, OSF hired a security detail. Nataki's entire life changed in an instant.
The threat was really shocking.
Can you talk to me about the emotional journey?
Yeah, so I just didn't leave my house for a month. I was avoiding leaving. I hadn't even thought about it. And so, later on you go, oh, you were in shock, like, oh, that's what shock is. When you're experiencing it, you don't know, you're just sort of coping and living. Like, I work in the theater. Like, right. It's really strange, like having to think about birthday parties and going to the grocery store and who takes my daughter to school. Because I'm conspicuous in a way that I've never been. I run, one of the largest organizations in the town, so people know me. I'm a Black woman. There aren't a lot of us here. It completely upended my life. But if my work has to come with a threat, then I have to really think about what I'm doing and be very intentional in how I'm doing it. Because, the things I do impact people's lives.
So you've been on the edge of this glass cliff for a little while now. Can you talk about what is your vision for this organization moving forward? What do you hope comes next for it?
So there's going to be a major announcement tomorrow. Okay. By the time this airs, I will have resigned.
What brought you to this decision?
I'll say this. I believe that there's dissonance between why I was hired and who I am as a leader. And I don't believe that the people who hired me had a clear enough idea about the organization they were hiring me to run.
A press release announcing Nataki's resignation from the Oregon Shakespeare Festival praised her selfless commitment and her critical role in guiding the organization through numerous transitions and crises, including the pandemic shutdown. I left Ashland thinking about the fact that although Nataki's experience feels extreme, she's only one of many Black leaders who have left or been forced out after 2020's historic push. Although Nataki has moved on to big and exciting projects, it feels as though doors are being closed once again. But it may be impossible for things to ever go back to the way they were.
Les afro-descendantes qui accèdent à des positions de pouvoir sont confrontées à la falaise de verre, au mobbing, à des morts sociales, les empêchant d'exercer un leadership transformatif et émancipateur, ce qui a des conséquences tant sur leur santé que sur celle de leur communauté.
That's Tamara speaking at the United Nations almost 5 years after she resigned. At the time of her resignation, the Quebec Ombudsman said that Tamara committed serious breaches of ethical standards, as well as a serious case of mismanagement, including an abuse of power. Tamara is now fighting to restore her reputation in court. She's suing the Quebec Ombudsman, claiming its investigation breached principles of procedural fairness, causing her irreparable harm, and she's suing the Quebec government. She's also speaking out about her experience and reclaiming her story. As she faces this battle, I'm curious to know if she still maintains hope in these institutions.
Thinking back on your experiences, do you think that it's possible when Black folks take leadership in organizations, institutions, companies that were not built with them in mind, for them to ever be able to enact change and find success?
If you want to do diversity, inclusion, and equity, you have to do racial justice and have the conversation about race. And for me, it's no representation without unpacking. You have to unpack to be able to see what's the problem, and people have to get more than educated. They have to understand. And for me, if people want to share power, we will have a better life. If they don't, still will stay the same, and there will be some token will be used to say that everything is all right. That's it.
So I've heard you use the term institutional heartbreak before, and I found it very apt. Can you describe what it means?
It is what it is. These organizations are built in a way not to be flexible, not to love you back.
Right.
This is like the heartbreak we have in love, where we have ideals and aspirations and dreams. And we really hope that this institution is going to meet us, and meet those dreams. And most institutions don't. And, there are ways in which I could make this work if I wanted to. I would have to change.
Right.
And that's not what I want to do.
Yeah.
When Gayleen Gould stepped away from her old job, she wanted to focus on her artistry, healing, and community. At this event, she's convened leaders from across cultural industries in the UK and is creating space for them to connect, heal, and create.
And you're all here, just to remind you, you are a smorgasbord of cultural professionals, artists, independents. So you'll have the whole day to do some really nice cross-cultural kind of conversations. I want to create the space to come. I want to create spaces where people can flourish and thrive, whoever they are, that's bounded by imagination and creativity.
As I stretched and breathed, I found myself considering my own glass cliff. Will interest in my work, my stories fade when diversity, equity, and inclusion are no longer buzzwords? Will I continue to work at an unsustainable pace because of a scarcity mindset backed up by the truth of being one of only a few? So often our work is subject to the whims of a cultural moment that is temporary. Yeah. And so what advice would you give for those that are trying to navigate these spaces and keep their work relevant regardless of what's going on in the outside world, when you know that work is important, whether these folks are feeling guilty or not, whether it's cool to be about diversity or not? This work still should be important regardless.
It's a great question. I think the most important thing is to work out, can this organization allow you to thrive and allow your voice to thrive, given the parameters that everyone's working with? You know, what are your parameters? Your job is to find a way to live fully. Your job is to find a way that your voice creatively can be in this world. Your job is to be happy, and I think that should be prioritized.
Gayleen's wisdom is invaluable, but she also chose to leave. How do you move forward when the dream is ripped out from under you? And so I asked Larry Wilmore, what changed when he left the Bernie Mac show? How did that shift the way that you moved through the industry and the way that you worked?
Great question. So the good news is when you go through that, it makes you kind of fearless. You know, after that, you go, well, what's the worst that can happen? I've been fired already.
Right.
I've been fired from my dream job. What's the worst that can happen now?
Since 2020, so many people around the world are starting to recognize the value of their labor and the value of their lives.
The people are the ones that make these corporations go. It's not the other way around.
I wonder how all of this will impact people like me who have been working from a scarcity mindset. How will this moment change those of us who no longer want to celebrate being the first and the only? What would it look like if we were to understand our value? And how would that knowledge change the strategies we use to transform these spaces? Should we even keep trying to transform them? I'm not sure, but I do know that teetering on the edge of the glass cliff is not where I want to be.
If it's a glass cliff within an organization, if they've reached the place where they're teetering on the edge, you choose to jump. If you have to jump, jump. It's just a job. You will fly, ultimately.